Good evening, America. What you're about to hear tonight is something that sounds almost impossible. Something that would have seemed unthinkable at any other moment in modern American history. As of this morning, the United States military launched fresh airstrikes inside Iran. Not last week, not before the ceasefire. Today, this morning, while peace negotiations are actively underway, while an Iranian diplomatic delegation is sitting in Qatar right now trying to finalize a deal to end this war, while Secretary of State Marco Rubio is traveling through India saying there is a pretty solid thing on the table, the United States of America bombed Iran during a ceasefire and called it defensive. And the entire world is watching to see whether this war is about to explode into something far, far worse. Stay with me tonight because every single detail of what happened in the last 24 hours matters, and we are going to go through all of it. Let us start with what actually happened on the ground overnight, because this is the story that changes everything else. U.S. Central Command issued a statement confirming that American forces conducted fresh military strikes inside southern Iran on Monday. The strikes hit targets that U.S. officials described as boats attempting to lay sea mines and missile launch sites. Rubio, speaking to reporters on his plane in Jaipur, India this morning, described the strikes as defensive. He said U.S. forces were protecting American troops from threats posed by Iranian forces. He said the Strait of Hormuz has to be open, quote, one way or the other, and added that the strait is going to be open, so it needs to be open. Now pause on that for a moment. There is an official ceasefire in place between the United States and Iran. That ceasefire has been in effect since early April, nearly 2 months. And while that ceasefire is in effect, while Iranian diplomats are on a plane to Qatar to negotiate a peace memorandum, while the whole world is holding its breath waiting for a deal announcement, the United States military is conducting airstrikes inside Iran. And the official American explanation is that these were defensive strikes, not an escalation. Iran's government has not yet issued a formal military response to the strikes as of this hour, but make no mistake. Every Iranian official who was sitting at a negotiating table in Doha today woke up to news that American missiles had just hit their country again. Every hardliner inside Tehran who has been arguing that the United States cannot be trusted, that any deal will be broken, that America negotiates in bad faith, had their argument handed to them on a silver platter this morning. The strikes did not just hit Iranian targets. They hit the negotiations themselves. And that is exactly why tonight's story is not just a military story. It is a story about what happens when the most powerful nation on earth tries to simultaneously bomb a country and make peace with it, and what that contradiction reveals about the true state of this war in this White House. Let us now lay out exactly where the negotiations stand, because despite the strikes, the diplomatic process has not stopped. It has accelerated dramatically in the last 48 hours, and the developments are extraordinary. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and Central Bank Governor Abdul Nasser Hemati all traveled to Doha, Qatar, on Monday evening. Qatar has now become the central hub for the final stretch of these negotiations, with Iranian and American teams meeting through Qatari intermediaries to try to resolve the remaining sticking points. That is Iran's top diplomat, its top legislative leader, and its top financial official all in the same room in Qatar at the same time. That is not a low-level technical meeting. That is Iran's entire decision-making establishment gathered in Doha to close a deal. And here is what the deal looks like as of this hour, based on the most detailed and credible reporting available. The proposed memorandum of understanding would work in 2 stages. In stage 1, Iran opens the Strait of Hormuz, demines the waterway, and allows commercial shipping to resume at pre-war levels. In exchange, the United States lifts its naval blockade of Iranian ports proportionately as the strait opens. The American blockade loosens only as the strait actually opens, step by step, with each Iranian action triggering a corresponding American response. A senior U.S. official described this as trust but verify on steroids. In stage 2, which would unfold over 60 days after the memorandum is signed, the 2 sides would negotiate the details of what happens to Iran's enriched uranium stockpile, Iran's nuclear program going forward, and the framework for a longer-term peace. The deal does not address Iran's ballistic missile program. It does not address Iran's support for Hezbollah and other regional proxies. Those issues are explicitly left for future rounds of talks that may or may not ever happen. Now, here is the critical new detail that has emerged just in the last 24 hours that every American needs to understand. A senior U.S. official confirmed that Iran has agreed in principle to dispose of its highly enriched uranium stockpile. The stockpile includes more than 400 kilograms, approximately 900 pounds, of highly enriched material, much of which was buried underground after American strikes last year. The official said Iran had agreed in principle to dispose of this material and open the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for the U.S. lifting its naval blockade. The official also said that Washington understood Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei had personally endorsed the broad template of this deal. That is enormous. The Supreme Leader's endorsement of a deal framework is the highest possible level of Iranian buy-in. But then the same official said something that tells you exactly how fragile this all is. It is a question about how, the official said, when asked about the disposal of Iran's enriched uranium. Not if, not whether, but how. The how of uranium disposal, under whose supervision, in what country, with what verification mechanism, with what international oversight, is itself a negotiation that could take months and produce no agreement. Iranian sources told Reuters that feasible formulas could be found, including diluting the material under UN supervision. But Iran has not committed to a specific mechanism. And without a specific, verifiable mechanism, the promise to dispose of enriched uranium is just words. And here is the contradiction that is at the very core of this entire crisis. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson, Ismail Baghei, said publicly on Monday that Iran was negotiating an end to the war and was not currently discussing nuclear issues at all. Read that again. The United States says Iran agreed in principle to dispose of its enriched uranium. Iran says it is not currently discussing nuclear issues. Those two statements cannot both be true. Either the U.S. official is characterizing the Iranian position more favorably than it actually is, or Iran's foreign ministry is publicly denying commitments that Iranian negotiators have already made in private. Both of those explanations are alarming. And then there is the question of the Strait of Hormuz itself, which is turning out to be even more complicated than the nuclear issue. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson said on Monday that Iran would not take tolls for passage through the Strait of Hormuz. That sounds like a concession. But he then added, and these are his exact words, that it was normal for services provided to require a price. Iran is claiming administrative authority over the strait as a permanent fact, regardless of any deal. Tehran says the strait belongs to the coastal countries, meaning Iran and Oman, and that the United States, quote, has nothing to do with it. Iran is not agreeing to relinquish control of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is agreeing to allow traffic to move through a waterway it still claims to control. That is a fundamentally different thing from what Trump has been telling the American public he is negotiating. The billboard that has been hanging in Tehran's Vanik Square throughout this crisis says it all. In Persian, it reads, "Forever in Iran's hand." That is not the message of a government preparing to surrender control of a strategic waterway. That is the message of a government that intends to use the Strait of Hormuz as permanent leverage over the United States, Israel, and the global economy for as long as the current regional balance of power holds. Secretary of State Rubio has now issued what amounts to an ultimatum wrapped in diplomatic language. Speaking to reporters in New Delhi before departing for Jaipur, Rubio said, "And I want you to hear these words carefully. We are either going to have a good agreement or we are going to have to deal with it another way." Another way. That is Secretary of State language for resumed military operations. Rubio knows exactly what those words mean to everyone listening. He used them deliberately. He is telling Iran that the alternative to a deal is not more negotiations. The alternative to a deal is more bombs. And then the bombs came anyway. President Trump posted on Truth Social on Monday with a message that laid out his position in stark terms. He wrote that talks with Iran were going nicely. And then he wrote, and I want every American to hear this, it will only be a great deal for all or no deal at all. Great deal or no deal. No middle ground. No partial agreements. No phased approach that leaves the hard questions for later. Trump is publicly committing himself to an all-or-nothing standard at the exact moment his own officials are telling reporters that the deal on the table does not include missile agreements, does not include proxy commitments, and does not include a specific nuclear disposal mechanism. The gap between Trump's public position and what is actually being negotiated in Doha tonight is enormous and growing. Now let us talk about Israel, because Israel's role in what happens next cannot be overstated and is not receiving enough attention in the American media. A senior Israeli official told reporters this weekend, speaking on condition of anonymity, that the emerging agreement is bad because it signals to the Iranians that they possess a weapon no less effective than a nuclear one, and that weapon is the Strait of Hormuz. This Israeli official was making a strategic argument that goes far beyond the current deal. He is saying that by allowing this war to end with Iran still in a position to threaten the Strait, America and Israel are teaching Iran a lesson that will define the next generation of Middle Eastern conflict. Iran has learned that controlling the Strait of Hormuz gives it more leverage than any nuclear weapon. And no deal being discussed right now removes that leverage. Iran will retain the physical, geographic, and military ability to close the strait again the moment any future confrontation makes it advantageous to do so. Meanwhile, the Lebanon question continues to be a major sticking point in the negotiations. Rubio told reporters that conversations with Israel and Lebanon over Lebanon's inclusion in the deal are ongoing. The potential memorandum reportedly includes a Lebanon ceasefire framework, but Israel is pushing for language that would allow it to continue military operations in Lebanon under the justification of responding to any threat. Iran is rejecting that formulation entirely and insisting on a sustainable and lasting ceasefire in Lebanon as a condition for signing any memorandum. Tehran has told all its mediators, including Pakistan and Qatar, that it will not put its signature on a document that gives Israel a legal carve-out to keep bombing Lebanon. And Israel has effectively told Washington that it will not accept a ceasefire that prevents it from responding to Hezbollah attacks. That is a triangle of contradictory demands with no obvious resolution. America wants a deal. Iran wants Lebanon protected. Israel wants operational freedom in Lebanon. Satisfying all three simultaneously may be mathematically impossible, and yet that is exactly what the negotiators in Doha are trying to do tonight. Let us also spend a moment on the economic picture, because the American people deserve to understand the full cost of what is happening right now. Oil prices fell modestly on Monday as markets responded to optimism about a potential deal. That modest price decline tells you how embedded the fear premium has become in global energy markets. Even the news that a deal might be days away only moved oil prices slightly, because the market has been burned before. Every time a deal was announced as close, it fell apart. Markets are no longer taking Trump's deal announcements at face value. And the Strait of Hormuz, which in normal times carried 20% of the world's seaborne oil and liquefied natural gas, is still not fully open. 240 ships are still waiting. Supply chains are still disrupted. American consumers are still paying elevated fuel prices. Myanmar's farmers cannot get fuel and fertilizer for their crops because the ships carrying those supplies have been stranded in the Strait of Hormuz for 3 months. The global human cost of this war extends far beyond the direct casualties in Iran and Lebanon. And speaking of casualties, the Lebanese health ministry confirmed today that the death toll from Israeli attacks in Lebanon since March 2nd has now surpassed 3,100 people, with more than 9,400 wounded and more than 1 million displaced. The WHO has confirmed at least 116 medical workers have been killed in Israeli strikes. Lebanon's healthcare system, already devastated by years of economic collapse, is struggling to function. Hospitals are overwhelmed. Medicines are running short. And the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, which was announced on April 16th, is violated almost every single day. So here's where America stands tonight on May 26, 2026. The United States launched fresh airstrikes inside Iran this morning during an active ceasefire and called them defensive. An Iranian delegation is in Doha right now trying to finalize a peace memorandum. The U.S. says Iran agreed in principle to dispose of its enriched uranium. Iran says nuclear issues are not on the table. The U.S. says the strait will be free and open. Iran says the strait will remain under Iranian management forever. Rubio says it is a good deal or another way. Trump says great deal or no deal at all. Israel says the emerging agreement is bad. Republican senators say it is a disaster. The IAEA still cannot get inspectors into Iran. Iran's ballistic missile program is untouched. Iran's proxy networks across the region are untouched. And the negotiators are in Qatar trying to bridge gaps that grow wider every time a missile hits Iranian soil. The next 72 hours may be the most important of this entire war. A deal could be announced. Or these strikes could be the beginning of the end of the ceasefire. This story is moving faster than any news cycle can capture, and it will determine the future of American power, global energy security, and the balance of forces across the entire Middle East. America, here is my question for you tonight, and I want you to think hard before you answer. The United States launched fresh airstrikes inside Iran this morning, even while peace negotiations were actively ongoing. Our own Secretary of State said there's a pretty solid thing on the table. And yet American bombs fell on Iranian soil tonight anyway. Do you believe the United States is negotiating with Iran in good faith? Or do you believe these strikes reveal that certain people in the Trump administration want this war to continue, regardless of what the negotiating teams put on paper? Drop your answer in the comments right now. This question goes to the heart of what American foreign policy actually is versus what we are told it is. Subscribe and turn on notifications because this story will break again tomorrow, and we will be here when it does.